Have you ever looked at a map of the UK and just thought, how on earth do you pronounce that place? Some of the place names are absolutely ridiculous. I completely admit that. For example, it is not Leicester, but Leicester. It is not Norwich, but Norwich. And some people will say Norwich. The secret is this: English place name suffixes carry centuries of history inside them. The spelling, it kind of shows where they came from: Anglo-Saxon, Viking, Roman, but the pronunciation also shows how they evolved in real speech. And in today's lesson, we're going to explore 12 of the most common suffixes in English place names. We'll talk about how to pronounce them in a modern British RP accent and also look at the etymology. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about 16 of the most commonly mispronounced place names in the UK. And please do remember, there is a free PDF for you to download where you can learn even more about this lesson. Hello, you wonderful people. Welcome to English Right Now. My name is Roy, your British English teacher, and I've been a teacher of English for nearly 15 years. Over that time, I've helped thousands of students just like you learning English, mastering British English, a modern British RP accent, and of course, learning more about the culture. And one question I get asked a lot is related to: how on earth do you pronounce this place name? Or why do you say this when it's spelt like that? And in this lesson, you're going to learn some of the main suffixes, the ends of words, to help you get closer to never saying Leicester ever again. Before we get started, there are a few things I need to mention. First of all, I will be pronouncing the suffixes, the ends of words, and also the place names in a modern British RP accent. There are lots of accents across the UK, and that means that some people may pronounce these places or these suffixes slightly differently. Another thing I need to mention is there are always or often exceptions to the rule. For every 5 or 6 that follow a certain rule, one just pops its head up and just says, no, I'm going to be pronounced a completely different way. I will look at some of them, but I'm not going to talk about all of the exceptions, but I will highlight some of them. And on top of that, some British places, the place names are just absolutely ridiculous. They are bonkers. Bonkers is a great British slang word which means a little bit crazy or nuts, which is why I've put at the end of this lesson 16 of the most commonly mispronounced place names. 16 because, of course, I love the number 16. And the final thing I need to tell you is the majority of these places, the vast majority of these places that we're focusing on, both the suffixes and the places, are in England. We'll do another lesson which focuses on the other parts of the UK a little bit further down the line. But now let's talk about 12 common suffixes to help you pronounce British place names. And first up, we have HAM. If you're talking about the meat, this is ham. But when it's a suffix at the end of a place name, we commonly pronounce it So the H disappears and the vowel reduces to a schwa. We can see this suffix in places like Birmingham, Nottingham, Durham, and Buckingham. This suffix, HAM, it comes from Old English, and it basically means farm or homestead. I know this video wouldn't be complete without me talking about 2 parts of London. The first is Tottenham. Tottenham. It looks like Tottenham, but the pronunciation quite commonly is 2 syllables, stress on the first, Tottenham. And the other place in London that we need to talk about is in East London, and it is West Ham. So a lot of people say, oh, is it an exception or you've got this wrong? But actually, ham in this word is not a suffix, it's its own word. So we pronounce it as ham, not 2 words, so we say West Ham. Now, notice that I pronounce the H in ham, but somebody potentially with a Cockney accent would drop the H and say West Ham. The second suffix we're going to look at is TON. It looks like ton, but the way we pronounce this is tun. So it's t, a schwa, the vowel reduces, and a n sound, tun. We can see it in places like Brighton, Southampton, and Luton. This also comes from Old English, and it means enclosure, estate, or homestead. And in fact, a lot of etymologists say it's the ancestor of our modern word town. So TON, the suffix, like in Luton and Southampton, show where small farms grew into villages or towns. It's quite fascinating when you explore the etymology. Number 3 is FORD. Now, we still have this word. You know, it's a manufacturer of cars, Ford. And a ford is also a shallow place in a river where you can cross. However, when it's a suffix, we commonly pronounce this one as fd. So it's f, d. Again, there is a vowel reduction to a schwa. You can see that in places like Oxford, Stafford, Hereford, Bradford, Watford, and Guildford. Now, again, I have been told that in certain places they do say Ford, but the vast majority of places it's pronounced fd as a suffix. It is not Bradford, it is Bradford. Now, this word ford comes from Old Norse, and it basically means a shallow place to cross a river, which is what it means now. Or it also talks about a crossing or a road. So many fords, or the places that end in the suffix fd, were vital crossing points, and they later became towns. Suffix number 4 is wich. Right, there is quite a bit to say about this. This suffix can be pronounced idge or itch, depending on the speaker. We see it in the places like Norwich, not Norwich, Greenwich, not Greenwich, and West Bromwich, not Bromwich. However, some people will also pronounce that suffix idge, so they'll say Norwich and Greenwich. Now, you'll notice in the 3 examples I've given so far, while there is a W in the words, in the place names, the W is silent. But here's where it gets a bit complicated, because there are exceptions. Just down the road from Norwich is a place called Ipswich. Ipswich. And in this place, we do pronounce the W. So it could be wich, widge, itch, idge. But as a general rule, those final 3 letters, ICH, could be pronounced itch or idge. I've just given you some examples with silent Ws. Now, this suffix comes from Old English, and it basically means a place or a settlement, although sometimes it also comes from Latin, meaning village. Suffix number 5 is cester. Wow, this one causes a lot of problems. Now, the common pronunciation of this one is st. It totally looks like cester, but it is st. St, and a schwa. We don't pronounce the R as an isolated word in a modern British RP accent. We can see it in places like Leicester. It looks like Leicester, but it is Leicester. That even counts for Leicester Square in London. We also see it in Gloucester, which looks like Gloucester, but no, it's Gloucester, and Worcester, which also lends itself to a source. We'll talk more about the source name a little bit later on. Now, this suffix potentially comes from Old English and Latin, and it basically is a word of Roman origin, and it means a camp or fortification. It's a mark of the Roman Empire in Britain. How fantastic is that? But like I say, there are always exceptions. So while we have Leicester, Gloucester, and Worcester, up pops Cirencester. Cirencester. But the vast majority of examples of this suffix are pronounced ster. And it's also related to the suffix Chester and Caster. For example, Manchester and Doncaster. So whenever you see a suffix with these, you're probably standing on old Roman ground. I love that. And number 6 is a Viking suffix, by. A lot of students pronounce this as by because we have a word that basically is that pronunciation. But when it is a suffix at the end of a place name, it's pronounced b. So we have Derby, Grimsby, and Whitby. And also with Derby, it is D-E-R-B-Y. It is not Derby, which would probably make more sense. It is Derby, with that long R vowel sound. Now, this suffix, by, comes from Old Norse. It's a Viking suffix, and it basically means farmstead or village. The next suffix looks like mouth, the thing on your face, but the pronunciation of M-O-U-T-H as a suffix at the end of most place names is muth. So it's Again, it contains a schwa. We can see it in places like Plymouth, Portsmouth, and Bournemouth. In fact, I live on the Isle of Wight these days, and just over the water is Portsmouth. Now, the origin of this suffix is from Middle English, and it basically means the mouth of a river, the opening of a river, the widest point of the river where it flows into the sea, or potentially it's related to the word bay. Now, I have heard some people pronounce that suffix more like mouth, depending on the stress, but for most of us, it is muth. The capital of Scotland is not Edinburgh or Edinburgh, as I've often heard it called. We need to talk about the suffix B-U-R-G-H, or in England, sometimes we often see B-O-R-O-U-G-H, which looks like borough. Now, if it's its own word, we say borough. Borough. For example, there is an area in London called Borough. However, when these letters are a suffix, there are two common pronunciations. It could be borough, two syllables, which is closer to borough, but there's no stress in those syllables, or some speakers just reduce it down to one syllable, bruh. So, for example, in a modern British RP accent, it could be Edinburgh or Edinburgh. Peterborough, some may say Peterborough, and of course, Middlesbrough. Personally, I usually pronounce this suffix as one syllable, bruh. This suffix comes from Old English, and it basically means a fortified town, and some etymologists say it relates to the German suffix, burgh, like Hamburg. Now, these places were often administrative and military centres, so the next time you go to Scotland, and you totally should, because Edinburgh is a beautiful place, please don't call it Edinburgh. L-A-N-D, as an isolated word, is pronounced land. However, when it's commonly at the end of some country names or place names, we often pronounce it lund. So we reduce the vowel from a to a. So it becomes a schwa. So we have England, not England. We have Scotland, not Scotland. We have Iceland, not Iceland. There's even a place in England called Sunderland, which is in the northeast of England. Now, as I always say, there are exceptions. First of all, some people may pronounce that suffix as land, and there are also some places, for example, Thailand, that I would say land, not lund, although in some dictionaries it does say you can pronounce it as Thailand. Personally, I say Thailand, and there are other exceptions as well, but for the vast majority of this suffix, it is lund. This word comes from Old English, and it means, surprisingly, land. The next suffix is W-O-R-T-H. Now, if you're talking about the value of something, you would say worth. How much is it worth? Quite commonly, as a suffix, you'll hear it pronounced as worth. A schwa, again, in a reduced syllable, worth. Although you will hear some people in certain areas call it worth. But a lot of us will say worth. You can see it in places like Tamworth, Bosworth, and Kenilworth. Now, this word comes from Old English, and it basically means an enclosure, and it often marks historic or fortified enclosures. Next up, we have a really common suffix, which thankfully actually is pronounced like it would be normally. It is field. Although I suppose there's a tricky spelling there anyway, because it looks like field. But the pronunciation of F-I-E-L-D as its own word is field, and as a suffix, it's field. You can see it in Lichfield, Chesterfield, and Sheffield. This suffix comes from Old English, and it basically relates to open land or a forest clearing. The next really common suffix is L-E-Y. The pronunciation of this is Lee, and it's seen in places like Crawley, Dudley, and Barnsley. This suffix comes from Old English, and it relates to a woodland clearing. And the final suffix we need to talk about before we move on to those 16 most commonly mispronounced place names is this one, S-H-I-R-E. As an isolated word, we do say shire. We talk about shire horses, or in Lord of the Rings, the hobbits live in the Shire. However, when it's a suffix, you may hear some people say shire, but personally, I say sh. So it's sh. So we have Oxfordshire, Bedfordshire, Derbyshire, so on, so on. And I know this lesson would never be complete without me saying Worcestershire. I have heard some viral videos saying wash your sister sauce, but the way we say this is Worcestershire sauce. Although a lot of people actually just say Worcester sauce, which, in my opinion, is a lot easier. And this suffix, sh, comes from Old English and basically means county. We have a lot of counties across the UK, and many of them end in the letters S-H-I-R-E, although not all of them. For example, I live on the Isle of Wight, which is also a county, and just across the water, there is another county called Dorset. There are quite a few examples that don't end in this suffix. And do remember, there is a lot more you can learn by downloading that free PDF that you can find in the link. But now, let me give you that wonderful little gift, the 16 most commonly mispronounced place names, in my opinion. These are English places that almost nobody outside of the UK pronounces correctly for the first time, because they are absolutely ridiculous. The pronunciation related to the spelling is ridiculous. And if you can master these, you'll instantly sound a lot more natural. Now, I'm not going to include on the list of 16 Leicester, Worcester, Norwich, or Norwich, depending on your pronunciation, or Derby. That's because I've already covered them in the first part of the lesson. Instead, we're going to look at 16 other most commonly mispronounced place names. And first up, we have one that looks like Luga-Baruga, but the pronunciation of this, ridiculously, is Loughborough. 2 syllables for me, although, as I've said, with that suffix, you may hear some people say it with 3, Loughborough. But it is definitely not Luga-Baruga. Next up, we have Warwick. It looks like Warwick, but it is Warwick. 2 syllables, stress on the first, Warwick. Third on the list is a place in Devon, and it looks like Teignmouth. Teignmouth. Now, we already know about that suffix. It's pronounced muth. However, this place is not pronounced Tain, it's pronounced Tin. So this place is Teignmouth. If you go to London, you might see a place that looks like Southwark, but the pronunciation of this place is Southwark. Again, as I'm going through this list, I understand how ridiculous these pronunciations are. If you go to the northeast, you'll see a place which looks like Alnwick. Alnwick. It's got an L in there, it's got a W in there, but the pronunciation of this place, 2 syllables, stress on the first, is Alnwick. So it's like we drop the L and we drop the W and we just say Alnwick. Down in Hampshire, there is a beautiful little place in the heart of the New Forest which looks like Biao-Liao, but the pronunciation of this place is Bewley. Next on the list is a place that I actually once pronounced wrong as well. Now, we were travelling up to Derby to see some relatives. My father pointed at this place on a sign and said, "Roy, how do you say this?" Now, I was like 6 or 7. I looked at it and I said, Bicester, which makes total sense. It looks like Bicester, but it follows the pattern of places like Leicester and Gloucester, and it's pronounced Bicester. If you head to Berkshire, you may see a place which looks like it should be pronounced Slough, rhyming with things like rough and tough. But this one is Slough. Those 4 letters, O-U-G-H, are a constant nightmare. Let me know if you'd like a lesson on the pronunciation, on the multiple pronunciations of those 4 letters, O-U-G-H, in a modern British RP accent. Heading down southwest, you will find the beautiful county of Cornwall. Highly recommend it. It is a beautiful place to visit. And you might see a place which looks like Mousehole. But actually, the pronunciation is not Mousehole, it is Mousehole. Right next to Cornwall is the equally beautiful county of Devon. And in Devon, there is one of my favourite places in the UK, Torquay. It looks like Torquay with that Q-U-A-Y, Torquay, but it is not. It is Torquay. Opposite end of England, in the northeast, you have a place which looks like Berwick and sometimes seen as upon Tweed. But the pronunciation is not Berwick, it's Berwick. Some people just say Berwick, they drop the W, whereas others will say Berwick upon Tweed. Down in Norfolk, we have a place which totally looks like it should be pronounced Happisburgh. Happisburgh. You can see it. There's happy in there, there's an S in there, and there's burgh. But we've already covered that suffix B-U-R-G-H can be pronounced br or burr. So is it Happisburgh? No, of course it isn't, because, well, English pronunciation. It is Haysborough. Down in Herefordshire, we have a place which looks like Leominster. Here, it becomes Leicester. So we just seemingly get rid of a lot of letters. In fact, it would be easier if we spelt it L-E-M-S-T-E-R. It is Leicester, not Leominster. Next up, we have one of the most commonly requested areas of London in terms of pronunciation. It's also a station. This one looks like Marylebone. This is not how we say this place. Now, there are 2 common pronunciations of this one, although you will hear some other pronunciations as well. Some people will say Marylebone, whereas if you head to the Cambridge Dictionary, you will see it with 4 syllables, Marylebone. But it is definitely not Marylebone. Heading back to Norfolk, we have a place which looks like Hunstanton. But we drop a few letters, and instead of Hunstanton, we say Hunston. And finally, a really common place that visitors from other countries love to visit. It is an absolutely beautiful place with a beautiful cathedral, and just down the road there is Stonehenge. And this one looks like Salisbury, but the pronunciation in a modern British RP accent is Salisbury. That suffix, B-U-R-Y, you could pronounce it as bury with 2 syllables or just brie, like the cheese. What I think is lovely about this is how spelling kind of freezes the past and shows that also pronunciation shows centuries of natural sound change. We drop syllables, we reduce vowels, we smooth out clusters, and that's why Worcester is not Worcester, it is Worcester. And every time you say places like Manchester or Oxford, you're not just speaking English, but a little Old English, a little bit of Norse, or even Latin. And that's why these place names are beautifully preserved reminders of everyone who lived there before. Please do remember there is a PDF, a free PDF for you to download, for you to learn even more. And if you enjoyed this pronunciation and etymology lesson, please do subscribe for more, because British English isn't just about sounds. A language is more than just words. It's about culture. Let me know in the comments below any other place names that you find really, really tricky. But from me today, I just want to say thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.